Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. 7 months into the Gaza war, political equations have shifted significantly. Israel is losing allies, and in the latest blow, the US has put arms shipments on hold, which raises the question, can Netanyahu win this war alone? And at what cost? Meanwhile, in Europe, Xi Jinping is exposing the disunion, whipping up anti-Western sentiments in Serbia before he heads to Hungary. Elsewhere, the Taliban is attending an OIC meeting, Organization of Islamic Countries. Does this mean that they recognize the Taliban regime? We'll discuss that. In India, aviation chaos after Air India Express cancels scores of flights. In Australia, a cap on student visas is directly hurting Indian students. The campus protests of America have spread to the rest of the world. Dramatic scenes in Europe, complete with police bulldozers and multiple arrests. In Germany, opposition leaders are asking for a kebab subsidy. We'll tell you why. In Malaysia, the government is mulling what's being called Orangutan Diplomacy. We'll explain. In the US, the state of Minnesota has passed a Taylor Swift law. What does it say? And all about the Met Gala and its complete disconnect with the real world. That and more coming up. The headlines first. In India, Rahul Gandhi's close aide Sam Pitroda resigns as the chairman of the Indian Overseas Congress. The decision comes after the Congress leader sparked a massive controversy. He said people in India's east look like the Chinese, while those in the south of the country resemble Africans. No end to UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's troubles. Another Conservative leader leaves to join the opposition Labour Party. It's the second defection in as many weeks. Just last week, the Tories suffered heavy losses in the local election. AstraZeneca withdraws its COVID vaccine worldwide. The pharma giant cites dwindling demand for this decision. Recently, AstraZeneca admitted that its COVID vaccine could cause rare but life-threatening injuries. In the UK, the company is facing multiple lawsuits alleging that its vaccine caused deaths. Malta's former Prime Minister and the current Deputy Prime Minister are charged with fraud and money laundering. The island country's central bank governor also facing similar allegations. This case relates to a hospital privatization scandal in 2015. And a court in Hong Kong bans the protest song Glory to Hong Kong. Authorities demand online platforms like Google remove it from their search results. The song became popular during the pro-democracy protests in 2019. It is the first song to be banned in Hong Kong since Britain handed the territory over to China in 1997. You've probably heard that lone wolves are dangerous, and it is true, they are. But here's the lesser-known fact. Lone wolves do not survive too long. Without a pack, they become weak and die. Why are we talking about this now? Because Benjamin Netanya is increasingly looking like a lone wolf. His allies have ditched him, his people have abandoned him, yet he pushes on. The question is, can this lone wolf survive? Let's look at the latest development. Reports say the US has paused weapons deliveries to Israel. What kinds of weapons? Mainly two types of bombs, the 907-kilogram one and the 227-kilogram one. Both these bombs were supposed to be sold in April, but the US is withholding them. It is also delaying the sale of JDAMs, Joint Direct Attack Munitions. Now, these are basically guidance kits. You put them on a bomb, it becomes a precision munition. The US was supposed to sell 6,500 of these to Israel, 6,500, but again, the sale has been paused. Why is US President Joe Biden doing this? Because he does not agree with Netanyahu's plan. The Israeli Prime Minister wants to invade Rafah. Most experts say it will be a bloodbath. And with an election around the corner, Biden does not want to risk anything. He's playing it safe. And he's not alone. A lot of countries have stopped military sales to Israel, some partially, some completely, like Canada, the Netherlands, Belgium, Japan, Italy, and Spain. So again, the question is, can Netanyahu win this war without them, especially the Americans? Can he win without them? Does he have the firepower to do so? His army is hoping it doesn't come to that.
When there are disputes, and there are, they are being resolved behind closed doors in a matter-of-fact way. We are responsible for the security interests of the State of Israel, and we are attentive to the interest of the United States in the region.
Wars are very expensive, especially when you don't have a fixed goal. And that is Israel's case. We don't have numbers from their government, but we have media estimates. By December, Israel had spent $18 billion on this war. That's $211 million every day. And that bill was expected to rise. By how much? To almost $50 billion this year. Can Israel's economy bankroll that? Well, their national GDP is around $522 billion. Their defense budget is $15 billion, 1-5. So spending so much on a war is not financially viable. We are talking about almost 10% of their GDP. Compare that to Russia. They are spending just 3% of their GDP on the Ukraine war. So clearly Israel is stretched, which is why the US is important. Around 68% of Israel's weapons imports come from the US, and this trade is virtually free. Every year, the US grants money to Israel. How much money? Around $3.8 billion. And they give this money on one condition. Israel must buy weapons from two places, either the US or domestic Israeli producers. So it's like a cycle. The US gives money to Israel, Israel pays that money back to the US, and the US gives them weapons. This has continued even after October 7th. The US has made more than 100 military transfers to Israel. Most of them have not been disclosed. Then last month came the biggest one yet. Biden signed a $26 billion package for Israel. Around $17 billion of that was for military, for the Israeli military, $17 billion. What sort of weapons are these? Tank ammunition, precision-guided bombs, small diameter bombs, bunker buster rockets, and artillery shells. Basically, the bread and butter of an invasion. If Biden stops these sales, can Netanyahu still win? Against the Hamas? Maybe. But it would leave Israel vulnerable. They need US weapons to deter Iranian proxies, to restock their air defense. And we saw an example of that last month. Iran fired hundreds of drones at Israeli territory. Around 99% of them were intercepted. How did they do it? Thanks to Western support. The US and UK shot down many of these Iranian drones. Same with the Houthis. They threatened to completely disrupt Red Sea trade, even blockade the sea route to Israel. Again, who stepped in? The US and UK. So the US support goes beyond just the bullets and bombs. It carries a lot of symbolism. It keeps Israel's enemies at bay. If that American support ends, Israel will be vulnerable. Maybe not today, but certainly in the long run. And Netanyahu knows this. Recently, he talked about self-sufficiency in defense. Let me quote. This is what the Israeli Prime Minister said. Israel is preparing the defense industries to disconnect from dependency on the rest of the world. We'll need to equip locally with a local manufacturing capability. Now, just to be clear, Israel's own defense industry is pretty strong. It is the 9th largest exporter in the world. India is actually their top buyer. But some big gaps remain. Israel does not produce fighter jets or helicopters. Neither does it make warships or submarines, or even Hellfire missiles. These are fired from helicopters to the ground, these Hellfire missiles. Israel buys these missiles from the US. In 2014, the Obama administration stopped selling these missiles to Israel, and that too was during a Gaza war. The US stopped the sale on 15th August. A ceasefire was signed on the 26th. So weapons are a big bargaining chip for Washington, and a pretty important one. Biden had not used it until now. Maybe the Rafah plans have pushed him over the brink. Xi Jinping is in Europe, looking to exploit cracks in the European Union. He's on his first diplomatic visit there in 5 years, the first since the Wuhan virus pandemic. His first stop was France, a bittersweet encounter with Macron. His second stop is Serbia, which is more friendly terrain. Belgrade, the capital of Serbia, is all decked up to welcome Xi. You cannot miss his presence today. You'll see Chinese flags everywhere, from the highways to the city, and in the heart of the capital, an entire tower has been draped in the Chinese flag. Clearly, Serbia is going all out to welcome Xi Jinping. He arrived there last night. Serbia's President Alexander Vučić was there to welcome him. They rolled out the red carpet for the Chinese leader, complete with a Serbian dance performance. What explains this warmth? Serbia is a rare European ally of China. It ticks all the right boxes for Beijing. It is not a member of the European Union. Its biggest source of FDI, its biggest foreign investor is China. Serbia backs China's claims on Taiwan, and in return, Beijing supports Serbia's claims on Kosovo. And to top it all, President Vučić calls Xi Jinping his friend.
President Xi and People's Republic of China mean a lot to us. They are our sincere friends.
Xi and Vučić met at the Palace of Serbia. Again, there were large crowds there just to greet the Chinese president. The optics convey a deeper message, one that the rest of Europe cannot afford to ignore. China is far from being isolated in this region. In countries like Serbia, where there is a strong anti-Western sentiment, China still holds considerable influence. And Xi Jinping is evidently trying to harness it. Before his arrival in Serbia, he criticized the US and NATO. He spoke about the Kosovo War. In 1999, when the Chinese embassy in Belgrade was attacked, it was bombed by NATO. 5 bombs were dropped by American jets on the Chinese embassy, apparently by mistake. At least that's what the US said. They said it was a mistake. They issued an apology to China. They even paid a compensation. But Xi Jinping has not forgiven the US. He recently wrote an op-ed for a local newspaper, and let me quote from what he said. 25 years ago, NATO flagrantly bombed the Chinese embassy in the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, killing 3 Chinese journalists. We must never forget this. Xi Jinping's visit happens to coincide with the 25th anniversary of that bombing. So the symbolism is on point. At the same time, the visit does not lack in substance. The Chinese leader has offered trade deals and investment proposals. Listen to this.
During my last visit to Serbia, we jointly decided to raise our relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership. Serbia since has become China's first comprehensive strategic partner in Central and Eastern Europe. I have much to say during the following hours. I believe my visit this time will open a new chapter in the China-Serbia relationship.
So what would this chapter look like? The joint statement from today gives some insights. China and Serbia have signed 29 deals today. The biggest among them was this, the China-Serbia Free Trade Pact. The deal was actually signed last year, but now both nations have decided to implement it, and the impact could be significant. According to Serbia, this pact will eliminate tariffs on 90 to 95% of the goods. This will happen over a period of 5 to 10 years, and EVs will be key to this partnership. That's electric vehicles. It's a very touchy subject in Europe. But Serbia's deal with China openly defies Brussels. Let me explain how. The EU wants to reduce imports of Chinese EVs. They're preparing to slap tariffs on Chinese cars coming to the European Union. But Serbia is doing the exact opposite. It is opening the doors wide for all kinds of Chinese goods. And the same script could play out tomorrow when Xi Jinping reaches Hungary. That's the third and final stop in his 5-day Europe tour. Again, Hungary is a friendly country for Xi, and he's setting the tone for his engagements by praising Viktor Orbán, the Prime Minister of Hungary. Xi Jinping said Orbán is pursuing an independent foreign policy and resisting pressure from the West. Like I said in the beginning, the Chinese leader is exploiting cracks in the EU. The union is divided, while Brussels is trying to keep China in check. However, unconvincingly, EU members are taking their own path. Let's turn to another diplomatic event. This one happened in Gambia, a session of the Islamic Summit Conference organized by the OIC, a group of 57 Muslim nations, Organization of Islamic Countries. It's a group of 57 Muslim countries. And guess who attended this summit? The Taliban. Their foreign ministry spokesperson traveled to Gambia for this summit. He took part in the discussions. And why is this important? Because none of these countries recognize the Taliban regime. In fact, they criticize it. Listen to the joint declaration they adopted at the very same summit. We stress the importance of full respect for the human rights of all Afghans and the need to protect the fundamental rights of Afghan girls and women, especially the right to education and work. But why take the long route? A Taliban representative was right there. So why not tell him directly? Because this whole thing is quite confusing. The Taliban took power in August 2021. It's been almost 3 years since they conquered Kabul. So safe to say they're not going anywhere, not immediately. Which means you have two options: either engage with them or shun them. Now the Chinese have chosen option one. This year, Beijing accepted an ambassador from the Taliban and Xi Jinping himself received the credentials. So China has made up its mind. It wants to do business with the Taliban. Which brings us to the second camp. Who is shunning them? At this point, no one. Most countries have figured out a hybrid approach, sort of like issue-based engagement. If it suits them, they will talk to the Taliban. If not, they will stay away. Just look at the United States. They have frozen Afghanistan's central bank reserves. We're talking about $3.5 billion. The US has frozen that money. The Taliban wants it back, but the US says, keep dreaming. Yet the same US held talks with the Taliban last year. Their focus was terrorism. India too has talked to the Taliban. There is an Indian technical team based in Kabul. It handles humanitarian work. Plus, the last Taliban regime supported terrorism in Kashmir, so this time New Delhi is keeping a close eye. But who loses out here? The ordinary people of Afghanistan, especially the women and minorities. Girls in Afghanistan cannot attend school or college, nor can they work. And the legal system is a farce. Adultery, for example, is punished by stoning and flogging. Not for men, of course. Such brutality is limited to women. So all countries face a tough choice. On the one hand, you cannot recognize and embrace such a regime. It is vile and oppressive. On the other hand, Afghanistan is very important. Islamic State offshoots are gaining a foothold there. Even Al-Qaeda is on the rise. A UN report says the Taliban is allowing these groups to flourish, so most countries are forced to engage. If not, the Taliban can hurt them, like they did in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Hence the hybrid engagement. The OIC is also doing the same. In December 2021, the Taliban's foreign minister attended an OIC meeting. His name is Amir Khan Muttaqi. But since then, he stopped attending. In March 2022, Pakistan hosted an OIC summit. Muttaqi did not attend. And this time, Gambia has hosted the summit. Again, Muttaqi did not attend. So the participation has downgraded since 2021. But Taliban is still at the table. And it tells you what the problem is. The world does not have a strategy to deal with them. It was very different in the 1990s. Back then, most of the world had the same strategy: isolate the Taliban. We saw very few diplomatic meetings, very few foreign visits, and very few engagements. But this time, it's been a diplomatic storm. Look at the countries their foreign minister, the Taliban foreign minister, has visited: Qatar, Pakistan, China, Russia, Norway, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Iran, and Turkey. I don't think this counts as isolation. The question is, where does this diplomatic push go next? Will the Taliban be invited to the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? Will they take Afghanistan's place at the UN? Let's hope it doesn't come to that, because engaging with the Taliban is one thing, embracing them is another. Afghan women and minorities deserve better. Flying in India has become a game of chance. Your flight could be delayed, it could be cancelled, or worse, you may be served dinner on the tarmac. This morning, it was Air India Express's turn. It cancelled more than 90 of its flights, both domestic and international, 90 flights. Passengers were stuck, operations were hampered. The airline offered an apology. India's aviation regulator took up the matter. They want answers. But what led to this crisis? Apparently, a so-called sick leave by senior crew members. It started on Monday evening. Crew members began calling in sick, so some flights had to be cancelled. By Tuesday, the situation escalated. More employees refused to show up. 300 crew members were missing. Some even switched off their phones. This morning, it snowballed. How do you operate flights with hundreds of your staff missing? So Air India Express began cancelling flights, and chaos followed. But what explains this mass sick leave? Was there a virus on board, or is there something else at play? Air India is yet to comment, but reports suggest it's because of brewing discontent. Employees are calling in sick to protest. They want to take a stand against alleged mismanagement. Their union even wrote a letter to the chairman. Let me quote from what it says. It is with great disappointment that we address the growing unrest and dissatisfaction among employees since the takeover by Tata. However, it appears that the reality on the ground does not align with these principles. So they're blaming the Tata takeover. For those of you who have not followed this saga, here's a quick primer. Air India was India's state-owned carrier. Air India Express is its subsidiary. In the year 2021, both were sold to the Tatas. And this acquisition left the Tata Group with 4 airlines. Now they have Air India Express, Vistara, and Air Asia India. By 2023, the Tatas wanted to merge them all. They wanted to keep just 2 airlines, one full-service carrier and another low-cost carrier. So Air India and Vistara would become a full-service airline. Air Asia India and Air India Express would be the low-cost carrier. That was the plan. On paper, it sounded like the perfect merger, but on the ground, it hit hurdles. The trouble began with Vistara last month. Employees protested against the merger. First officers called in sick. They complained about the new pay structure. Close to 100 flights were cancelled. And now the same is happening at Air India Express. So clearly the merger is not going well. But the Tatas have not addressed it. In fact, they want to speed it up. They want to merge all operations by 2025. And by the looks of it, that could lead to more discontent. Like we said, the aviation regulator has taken up the matter and they want answers. But in the meantime, brace for turbulence. And this couldn't have come at a worse time because this crisis puts pressure on an already burdened system in India. It is the world's fastest growing aviation market. Air traffic may touch 154 million this year, so there are plenty of passengers. The numbers are increasing. But are there enough flights? Right now, India has 5 main air carriers: Indigo, Air India, Vistara, SpiceJet and Akasa. 4 of them are bleeding money. Only Indigo managed to turn a profit last year. Since 2019, 2 major airlines have gone bust in India. Others are operating under stress. There is a lack of pilots and backup staff. Infrastructure is limited, turnaround time is tight, fuel cost is high, plus carriers have to look at cost efficiency. They have to keep prices low, which leads to flight disruptions, cancellations, delays, and poor service. If one airline falters, there's a domino effect. It impacts the entire aviation sector. And at the end of the day, it impacts you, the customer. So if you're traveling in the next few days, be wary. Check if your flight is cancelled or delayed. And also prepare for lofty airfares. Because while India's aviation sector may be soaring, when it hits turbulence, you pay the price. The college protests against Israel continue, this time in Europe. Students have organized rallies across the continent in France, in Germany, in Belgium, in Switzerland, and in Austria. In some places, things got violent. Like at the Amsterdam University, pro-Palestine protesters had set up camp there. So the Dutch police arrived in force and they came with a bulldozer. Take a look. Imagine that, running bulldozers over a student protest site. What if this happened at an Indian college? The sermons would never have ended. The democracy indices would have updated in minutes. But since this is Amsterdam, no such outrage. Either way, these camps appear to be the new strategy. Put up tents in public places, make unrealistic demands and wait for a crackdown. That's what students seem to be doing. Let me show you pictures from the UK's Oxford University. Just look at the tents. They were pitched in front of the Museum of National History. And what do these students want? Same thing as US colleges. They want Oxford to divest from Israel. Now look at Belgium. Around 100 students occupied a university there. They've pitched tents inside the building, even set up food counters. In Spain, similar scenes. Protesting students have set up a camp in Madrid, but the response has not been violent here. You could say that was expected. Spain's government is firmly pro-Palestine, so the students have nothing to fear. In Germany, though, that was not the case. Israel is a very sensitive issue in Germany. Many Germans still carry the guilt of the Holocaust. So protesting against Israel is risky. Nonetheless, students in Berlin set up a protest camp. They occupied a college courtyard. Look what happened next. Many of these students have been arrested. In the Netherlands, around 169 people face charges. In France, around 86 people were arrested. I'm sure the numbers will keep rising, but where do things go from here? Well, look at what's happening in the US. The protest started around 2 weeks ago. Many colleges cracked down on the students. Hundreds were arrested, dozens were suspended, yet the protests continue. More encampments have popped up in New York and Washington, so crackdowns have not worked in the US. Why would they work in Europe? Also, what if these protests spread beyond Europe, to Arab nations, or to South and Southeast Asia? We've seen some indications already. Over the weekend, massive protests were organized in Bangladesh. Thousands of university students turned up. They burnt effigies of Benjamin Netanya. Take a look. Again, Bangladesh is pro-Palestine. They don't even recognize Israel. So Dhaka may not mind these protests. But every government values public order. You can't have hundreds of students disrupting classes and occupying colleges. Neither can you afford counter-protests. So most governments will be watching this closely, and I know these protests are quite divisive. Even student politics as an issue is quite divisive. But what we are seeing is possibly unprecedented. Students across continents are protesting together in North America, in Latin America, in some parts of West Asia, in South Asia, in Europe, and in some parts of Africa. When was the last time you saw something like this? Maybe for issues like climate change or human rights, but never for something so political. So these protests could have a long-term impact. First, for the cross-continental solidarity, and second, for the result. Divestment may or may not happen, but Western governments have been forced to rethink. That could be the legacy of this campus chaos. In Australia, a different kind of campus chaos. They've set a new target for themselves. The government, they've set a target, cut immigration by half in 2025. And how will they do that? By cracking down on student visas. So foreign students are bearing the brunt of the government's new policies, and among those affected are Indian students. Since 2022, visas granted to Indian students have fallen by 48%. and they could fall further in the coming days. Meanwhile, some universities have imposed a blanket ban on Indian students. They're no longer accepting applications. Will this affect relations between India and Australia? If you're an Indian student planning to study in Australia, this next report is a must-watch.
Australia is cracking down on immigration. The first casualty is the student visa. Canberra wants to reduce its intake of foreign students, so it has introduced some new rules. 1. Tougher eligibility criteria. 2. Stronger English language tests. 3. Additional rules for agents bringing students into the country. And 4. Several colleges have been asked to check fraudulent recruitment practices. The biggest change is the amount of savings. Australia has hiked it for foreign students. To study in the country, international students must show proof of savings. In October, it was $13,800. Now, it's around $19,500. It's quite a steep hike in just a few months, and that is impacting a lot of students. Not just that, there are accusations of targeted denial of visas. It's hitting Indian students. Between 2022 and 2023, visas granted to Indian students fell by 48%. Currently, 120,000 Indians study in Australia. Indians make for the second largest group of foreign students in the country, so the denial of visas has raised questions. Australia has cited two reasons for this: an increase in incomplete applications and fraudulent documentation. But it has spooked many Australian institutions. Australia has a risk rating system. This takes into consideration students at a particular college. Canberra rates the institution on the basis of visas that are rejected, visas that are cancelled, or those who seek asylum illegally. Colleges do not want to be labelled high risk, so many have changed their policies. According to reports, some have even imposed a blanket ban on Indian students. International education is one of Australia's largest export industries. In 2022, it contributed $24 billion to the economy. But it has led to record migration, mostly driven by international students. In 2023, immigration rose by 60%. It hit a record of 548,000. That burdened the country's housing market. Rental prices soared across Australia, so the government had to act. The policies aim to halve Australia's migrant intake in just 2 years. It wants to cut new arrivals by about 250,000 a year. Canberra aims to prevent foreigners using colleges to make a backdoor entry into the country. But singling out students from a particular country could harm their reputation. It could even impact bilateral relations. After the pandemic, Australia opened its doors to the world. It called for more investments. It attracted more students with its education policies. But now it is cracking down on those very students.
Now let's turn to Germany, Europe's one-time engine of growth. Germany was known as an economic powerhouse, but these days the picture is grim. So dire, in fact, that you get headlines like this. That's right, Donnerflation is back, and Germans are terrified. They fear their doner kebabs will soon be unaffordable, and political parties are capitalizing on this fear. One party in particular, Die Linke, which means the left. Now, Die Linke complains that kebabs cost too much. In 2 years, they went from €4 to 10. But the party has put forth a populist proposal, a kebab cap to bring down donerflation. The party wants to put a ceiling on the price of doner kebabs at €4.9, 2.9 for young people. Now, obviously, that sounds absurd. Why would anyone sell kebabs at a loss? So Die Linke has proposed a whopping €4 billion subsidy to compensate distributors selling their kebabs at a loss. This kebabonomics sounds half-baked or half-grilled, whatever the case be. But it also highlights a real problem: the precarious state of the German economy. Last year, Germany was the only G7 country where the economy shrank. It contracted by 0.3%. This year, things aren't looking much better. not according to the German Economic Institute. It's a private research institute in the city of Cologne. It has released a forecast. It says Germany will stagnate this year. That means 0% growth, zero. Last year, the German economy shrank. This year, it could remain stagnant. Now, this is technically a minor improvement. But you know something is wrong when 0% growth is a positive thing. So how did it come to this? How did Europe's growth engine grind to a halt? Well, there are a lot of reasons. First, there was the Wuhan virus. COVID-19 took the world down, Germany included. But as it was recovering, there was another crisis, the Russian effect. Before 2022, before Vladimir Putin's war on Ukraine, Germany depended on Russia for energy. Cheap natural gas from Russia fueled German growth. It helped power German factories at a very reasonable rate. This in turn helped Germany manufacture goods cost effectively. That was the process. Cheap Russian gas subsidized German manufacturing. But that chain snapped in 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine. In a few months, Germany stopped importing Russian gas. This took a toll on German manufacturing, especially energy-intensive industries like chemicals, metals, and paper. They just started to recover from COVID, but the end of Russian gas stopped their recovery. Of course, Germany is not unique here. The entire world suffered during the pandemic, and all of Europe was affected by the Ukraine war. So why is Germany still lagging behind? Well, there's another problem that's hitting Germany, and that is old age. This is a chart prepared by the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. It looks at the working age population in the G7 countries, how that population is going to change in the next 5 years. As you can see, Germany is in the red. In the next 5 years, Germany will lose the most workers. People will retire and Germany won't be able to replace them with younger workers. And that is never good for an economy. It's unsustainable. It slows down economic growth. All these factors put together, the Wuhan virus, the war in Ukraine, and the aging population have hammered Germany's growth. It may recover from the first two, but Germany can't make its population younger. So unless it increases immigration, Germany is looking at a long, slow road to decline. Pop icon Taylor Swift has hundreds of songs to her name, but she also lends her name to other things like Ivy League courses, a newly discovered millipede species, and now a law. The US state of Minnesota has passed a so-called Taylor Swift law. It will protect online ticket buyers in the state. This comes after a 2022 controversy where 14 million fans and bots tried to buy tickets to a Swift concert on the ticketing platform Ticketmaster, and the platform crashed. Many tickets were cancelled, many were resold for enormous amounts, and many fans were left fuming. Now, Minnesota's new law promises to protect consumers from such scenarios, but will it work? Who else will benefit from it? And do other states or nations have similar laws? Here's a report.
This is no tortured poet's department, but kindly excuse the Taylor Swift puns in this story. Because the American state of Minnesota is witnessing bad blood between legislator Kelly Moller and the ticket conglomerate Ticketmaster. In 2023, Moller wanted to buy tickets to a Taylor Swift concert. Yes, that Taylor Swift, the billionaire, the pop icon. Tickets to her concert were available on Ticketmaster's portal. Moller had a code that insured tickets, but they never materialized. And Moller didn't just shake it off. Instead, she introduced a bill called House File 1989, based on Swift's birth year. This week, it was signed into law, and it gives Ticketmaster the karma it deserves. What does this so-called Taylor Swift law say? It will require ticket sellers to disclose all fees up front and prohibit resellers from selling more than one copy of a ticket. This will give ticket buyers more transparency, control, and choice. This law will apply to Minnesota, both for tickets purchased here and live events held in the state. It will come into force on the 1st of January 2025. And then everything will have changed, not just for Moller, not just for Swifties or fans of Taylor Swift, but for everyone buying tickets online for concerts, sporting events, and other live events in Minnesota. You see, Ticketmaster has been receiving scorn for the past few years. It is based in the US, but operates in many countries the world over. Over time, it has become a monolith of ticketing. But it doesn't offer the ticket buying experience it promises to. The portal has fraudulent tickets, bots, resellers who snatch up tickets before consumers get a chance, forcing fans to pay 10 times the price. Plus, Ticketmaster doesn't disclose the final price, so people wait in lines for hours, get a chance to buy a ticket. When they reach checkout, they find hidden costs, making the tickets much more expensive, so consumers feel tricked. When it comes to sporting events, it has become increasingly difficult to buy tickets on the platform. Report after report will prove this, and this is a problem Swifties know all too well. Swift's Eras tour began in 2023. Prior to that, 14 million users and bots tried to buy tickets in November 2022. So the ticketing site crashed. Ticketmaster subsequently cancelled ticket sales. Meanwhile, resellers took advantage of the situation. This fiasco prompted investigation from US lawmakers.
I hear others saying, you're making too much money, and that's hurting the consumer because those fees get passed on. If you care about the consumer, cap the price. Cut out the bots. Cut out the middle people. And if you really care about the consumer, give the consumer a break.
But nothing much has changed since. The ticketing monopoly has persisted. And so have the problems. Now Minnesota is cracking down and joining the likes of Maryland, which is another US state, and Brazil to pass protections for ticket buyers into law. Ticketmaster is clearly in a delicate situation, and if matters don't improve, Ticketmaster and live event fans may never ever get back together.
Our next story is from Malaysia. They've decided to take a leaf out of China's diplomacy book. Don't worry, Malaysia is not planning to harass its neighbors. It won't try and bury other countries in debt either. No. Malaysia plans to use a relatively harmless Chinese strategy: animal diplomacy. China does it with pandas. Malaysia plans to do it with orangutans. Orangutans are indigenous to just two countries, Malaysia and Indonesia. In fact, the orange apes are only found on two islands, Indonesia's Sumatra and Borneo, which is shared by Indonesia, Malaysia and Brunei. That's it. Just two islands are home to all the world's orangutans. And these apes are endangered. So what does Malaysia plan to do with them? Send them overseas. Yes, Malaysia plans to gift orangutans to foreign nations, the way China does with pandas. Malaysia's plantation minister is calling this orangutan diplomacy. But there's a major difference between the two countries. China uses panda diplomacy to increase its soft power. The pandas are loaned to nations for a few years, usually to state-of-the-art zoos. Any panda offspring has to be sent back to China. It's all tightly controlled. But Malaysia may not go down this exact route. Their minister is not talking about loans or facilities yet. Instead, he's focusing on something else entirely, and that is palm oil. The minister said Malaysia cannot take a defensive approach when it comes to palm oil, so the orangutan diplomacy is part of a charm offensive. Malaysia will gift orangutans to major palm oil importers. The minister specifically mentioned three places: China, India, and the European Union. In fact, the EU might hold the key to understanding this bizarre new move. You see, Malaysia and Indonesia are the world's biggest exporters of palm oil. Together, they control 85% of the market. But that dominance comes at a cost often borne by the orangutans. Malaysia and Indonesia have cut down forests to plant oil palm trees. The destruction of the natural habitat has killed thousands of animals, including the endangered orangutans. This process has been under the scanner for a while, and last year the EU decided to do something about it. They imposed a new regulation, a deforestation-free regulation. And what does it say? It says EU countries cannot import products that result in deforestation. Any natural products like palm oil must not come from new plantations, nothing from areas deforested after 31st December 2020. These new EU rules come into force by the end of this year, so the bloc may stop buying oil from Malaysia, which is why Kuala Lumpur thought of orangutan diplomacy. It hopes to show the EU that its orangutans are safe and healthy, that they're being conserved. It's not exactly the best plan, though. After all, you're evicting endangered animals, handing them over to foreign nations, and that too the biggest buyers of oil, one of the reasons these animals are endangered in the first place. Perhaps Malaysia needs to rethink its plan. But here's the other side of the story. Malaysia is a developing country. It is trying to protect its business. Deforestation is an unfortunate side effect. Hopefully, Malaysia will find a way towards sustainability. But the last thing it needs is threats and lectures from the EU. Europeans colonized both Malaysia and Indonesia. They set up the first plantations in these countries. The British and the Dutch exploited these islands long before the locals did. And now, after pilfering and pillaging the planet for centuries, the Europeans talk about sustainability. As usual, it reeks of hypocrisy. And in this case, it stinks of opportunism too. Europe has its own sources of edible oil. Olive oil is especially popular. There are numerous plantations all over Spain and Greece and Italy. But olive oil is expensive compared to palm oil at least. So what happens if Malaysian palm oil is banned or exports are severely curtailed? Won't that help Europe's indigenous oil industry? It sounds like protectionism. Malaysia has called it crop apartheid. Indonesia says it is regulatory imperialism. Malaysia is appealing the EU rules at the World Trade Organization, but so far it has seen limited success. So orangutan diplomacy is Malaysia's latest tactic, a last-ditch move to protect its trade. It may not be the best idea, but it proves that Malaysia won't quit until it exhausts all options. Our last story tonight is about one of the biggest money-making machines in fashion, the Met Gala. It was held this week at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. 400 A-listers showed up from the world of fashion, movies, music and business. Most stars brought their A game, not necessarily in terms of fashion, but ludicrousness. One singer had to be lifted and brought up the stairs because she could not walk in what she was wearing. Another wore what looked like a mosquito net. Stars attended this big party in bizarre outfits. Yet together, they raised $26 million for the museum's Costume Institute, once again proving the Met's complete disconnect from the outside world. Here's a report.
This week, the world tuned in to dissect the Met Gala. It was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Who attended it? All kinds of A-listers. Billionaire businessmen, fashion icons, movie stars, singers, reality stars, and so on. About 400 guests were in attendance. This was one of the most elite fashion events of the year. But it was also a buffet of baffling outfits, as it usually is. Of course, we aren't talking about the male stars. They did what they do best, which is show up in a black tux. Underwhelming to say the least. But some celebrities got innovative and took inspiration from household items. Singer Lana Del Rey showed up in a mosquito net, and Rita Ora was in a ribbon curtain. Meanwhile, South African singer Tyla showed up wearing sand. Yes, sand, and well, crystals, because that addition makes it haute couture. Except she couldn't walk. She had to be lifted and carried up the stairs. But this wasn't the only buzzworthy moment that trapped our attention, pun intended. Because Ed Sheeran got stuck in FKA Twigs' noodle dress. Most of all, there were lots of florals, power poses and memes. Well, why wouldn't there be? One star looked like she was visiting her barber. Celebs went all out with their creativity. But if you're a fan, don't take the harsh comments to heart. These moments did seem bizarre, but maybe that's what fashion is. In fact, the gala was less about the absurdity of it all and more about the unmet expectations at the Met. This year the theme was the Garden of Time, based on J.G. Ballard's 1962 short story. It's a haunting piece about power and status. It's a biting commentary on the ruling class. It talks about keeping the real world at bay. Not only did fashionistas take the theme literally by wearing florals, how groundbreaking some would say, they also proved once again that the Met refuses to acknowledge the outside world. And at the end of the day, it's less about fashion and more about money. This year's event raised about $26 million. Where will this money go? To the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Costume Institute. This is a $4 million increase over last year's total and more than double what the event raised a decade ago. While that happened outside the museum, protesters criticized the event as a distraction from the war in Gaza. And the night before, organizations held the Debt Gala. People wore feather boas, bathrobes, even styled pajamas, and raised money for organizations that relieve medical debt. Maybe it's time the Met Gala gets honest. It should openly accept that this event is just a money-making machine. It doesn't care about the real world, and it doesn't even care about fashion. Because if it did, well, people wouldn't be showing up in wet t-shirts.
Now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In Istanbul, a Boeing 767 cargo plane landed on its nose, forcing its pilots to climb out of the cockpit window. In France, skies lit up to celebrate the arrival of the Olympic flame. And do you hate doing daily chores? Well, very soon you could get a humanoid robot to do the job. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1980, smallpox was eradicated from the world. It was one of the most devastating diseases known to humanity. Smallpox led to millions of deaths across the globe. Widespread immunization and surveillance helped eradicate the highly infectious disease. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We will see you tomorrow.
This is Daniel Cedric Bumba. Every morning as the sun rises in Uganda, he, along with other young boys and girls, prepare a battleground. The soil is tilled and wetted inside a makeshift wrestling ring. And then a dramatic announcement hails the arrival of the first contestants.
Introducing first the challenger, weighing at 217 pounds.
These young Ugandans are dreaming of becoming professional wrestlers. They gather for a soft ground wrestling competition in the district of Mukono. Their training sessions imitate pro wrestling contests on television that these teenagers follow religiously. While one pair fights on inside the ring made from bamboo poles, the others cheer the show of strength from the outside.
Ladies and gentlemen, the following is a friendly match. Introducing first the challenger, straight out a Katwe, weighing in.
They mimic every move, action and sound as their famous idols in the World Wrestling Entertainment combat sport, popularly known as the WWE.
In 2019, I was there in somebody's house working as a housemaid. One day, because he was using DSTV, we used to watch on WWE channel. Then I started watching wrestling in 2019. Then I was like, these guys, they can do that. I was very, very, very amazing. It was very amazing. Even me, I told myself in me, and I said, no, one day I will maybe, if God wishes, if we can be with us academy wrestling here in Uganda, one day I will join.
The Ugandan soft ground wrestling group started in 2023. In the local wrestling community, it is known as Bumbash.
This pro wrestling, it has not been here in Africa, East Africa, for example, but we've heard of it in Nigeria and South Africa. So I wanted to introduce a new thing on the block, whereby it comes from the inner me, because I have the zeal, the adoration, and the love for the game. Unlike other sports like swimming, boxing, basketball, kickboxing, I love wrestling with all my heart.
The 35-year-old founder of the community, Daniel Cedric Bumba, hopes some of these wrestlers, many of them orphans, can do well and long enough to go professional. He says he hopes to build a professional ring and an academy not just for the youth in Uganda, but for those all across Africa.
I want these students or young Ugandans to pursue their career in pro wrestling and go further to follow their dream, so as they can become professional potential wrestlers in future.
For now, Bumba is yet to find appropriate training facilities and health insurance for participants. The fighting looks dangerous, but he insists that they take precautions.
So far, I've never had an injury, serious injury. Like the injuries we get like this, but it's not serious injuries, right? Like you have like a shock, yeah? Like a shock, and then you go to the clinic, then they prepare you, like 2 or 3 weeks, then you get set, then you come back, but it's not always serious. But this game is not dangerous, so that you're used to it, and you know how to take landings. Our coach always tells us that safety first.
Many of the youth in and around the ring have long dropped out of school. Some trainees live in a dorm nearby where they have access to weightlifting equipment. Bumba says the community could benefit many children who might otherwise be idle or trapped in crime. And some of these young protégés also imagine a future on the biggest wrestling stage of all.
My dream is to be in the greatest company called WWE, professional wrestling in United States of America. That's where my role model is, Seth Rollins.